In the immediate aftermath of World War II, it was obvious to everyone that jet engines were going to be the future of military aviation. This was an area where the Soviets knew they were a little behind, as the military situation during the war hadn't really allowed them much opportunity for advanced R&D projects, and very little work had been done in designing jet-powered aircraft. Though there were a few engine designs in various states of maturity, nothing was ready for production. After the Soviets gained access to German engine designs and a stockpile of completed engines, they went to work putting this new technology into use. The Yakovlev Design Bureau knew that these engines weren't going to produce a lot of thrust, and understood the sense of urgency in getting a jet-powered aircraft into the air. So rather than start from scratch, he based his new jet fighter on the Yak-15, which was already a proven piston-engined aircraft and could also be kept very light. The new jet, designated Yak-15, basically took the Yak-3 and reworked the nose a bit to fit a front-mounted jet engine exhausting down under the fuselage. There were some internal structural changes, and after taxi tests, the rear wheel's rubber tire was replaced with steel, because it turns out that pointing a jet engine directly at a rubber tire doesn't end well. But otherwise, the work went pretty quickly, and in April of 1946, the first prototype took to the air. A small production run was ordered, but it became obvious that the new jet had limited combat utility. Its top speed, acceleration, and rate of climb were all much lower than hoped. But still, the Soviets wanted to get new jets into production as quickly as possible to build up industrial experience with them and get pilots switched over. The Yak-15 ended up being used primarily as a conversion trainer, and I couldn't find any reference in primary sources to them being deployed operationally to any frontline units. However, the plane had the same excellent agility as the Yak-3 it was based on, and found a bit of a niche as an airshow performer. In total, a little over 260 were built, and together with the Saab 21R, is one of the only two jet fighters ever produced out of a successful conversion from a piston-engined aircraft. What we get in Warthunder is the Yak-15. This is a jet fighter in rank 5 of the Soviet air tree at battle rating 6.7. There's also the Yak-15P, the airshow model with only one cannon, and almost all of this review applies to that plane as well. As an aside, the Yak-15P was the very first jet I ever got in Warthunder 10 years ago, and although I was seriously let down with it at the time, the plane still has some nostalgia for me. This jet's only armament is a pair of NS-23 cannons with 60 rounds each. That's it. The NS-23 isn't a very accurate gun. It's got a weird cyclic rate, it's somewhat low velocity, and as of making this review, it's plagued by the dreaded reel shatter mechanic, so sometimes even solid hits end up doing almost no damage. Shooting down targets with this plane ends up being a bit more art than science. The flight performance of the Yak-15 has earned a pretty sour reputation over the years, and I'm sad to say it's pretty well deserved. The defining shortcoming of this jet is simply that it's chronically underpowered. It's just plain old slow. The acceleration is bad, the rate of climb is bad, and the top-end speed is faster than props, but it's slower than basically any jet it faces. The SK-60 and AR-234 are both very slightly slower on paper, but speaking generally, if another jet wants to deny an engagement, you can't usually catch them unless you have a tremendous initial energy advantage going in. And if a jet wants to force an engagement, you can't run and you have to take it. In fact, because the acceleration is so poor, even higher-end prop fighters can force an engagement if they come in on you with a bit of an energy advantage. Compounding these challenges, the controls lock up really hard if you get close to 700 kilometers an hour, and the wings will rip off at around 750 at most altitudes, so when you get that flashing speed warning, you actually do need to slow down. That's the bad news. The good news is that the Yak-15 has absolutely amazing agility at high and medium speeds. I would go so far as to say that this is the most maneuverable of all of the entry-level jets, with the HE-162 being the closest competitor. if you can keep this thing above around 350 kilometers an hour, you can outturn almost anything you face, even a lot of the prop fighters. But the problem is that you regain lost energy much slower than everything else, so you have to be very careful not to let an engagement go on for too long. The overall energy retention is mostly okay, but the energy gain is awful, so you have to make sure not to lose too much in any individual fight. Flying the Yak-15 out in air battles can honestly be kind of a frustrating experience. If you're having a bad streak, it can waste an enormous amount of time. The main challenge is, again, that this thing is just too damn slow. You're the slowest plane on the team, every match, and sometimes the match can be halfway over by the time you even get within range of seeing any combat. Now, the normal meta at this BR bracket is still climb to win, but the thing is, you can't. The acceleration and rate of climb are just too poor. So in order to actually climb up to like 4,000 or 5,000 meters, you've got to side climb for a really extended period of time. I'm talking like maybe 4 or 5 minutes. In the clip I showed attacking the B-29, that's what I had to do. I side climbed for basically the entire match, and you can see that by the time I actually caught up to the bomber, it had already done its thing and was back behind its home base. Because not only did I have to factor in the time to climb, it was the time to catch the bomber that I was trying to intercept. What has tended to work, best for me anyway, is to try and use the Yak-15's crappy speed as a positioning tactic. Aim to climb out to like a medium altitude, and try to get there at a reasonable speed just as the opening phase of the match is winding down, so that you can try and be in a position to either pounce down on some enemy ground pounders, or go in on enemy fighters who themselves dove in on your team's ground pounders. It's a bit of a timing attack. If you can manage this setup, it actually works pretty well, and it can get you going with enough of an energy advantage at the beginning of an engagement to force otherwise superior planes into turning fights that they just can't hope to win. This brings us to the guns. What can I say here? The offensive firepower on this thing is really problematic. The NS-23s aren't very accurate, but even when you do connect with them, you get a lot of sparks and regular hits without actually causing too much damage. Oh, and the ammo count is so low that you don't usually have enough ammo for more than 1 or 2 engagements unless you're a God mode sniper or something. My best advice is to get really close, shoot in very short bursts, and aim for wings whenever possible. I've had more luck blowing wings off rather than trying to set fire into fuselages or blowing off tails. Visually, the Yak-15 is a pretty weird-looking little plane. It's a Yak-3, but it's a jet, and that front-mounted engine's pretty distinctive. You're probably either going to love this thing or hate it, and you get 2 in-game skins available. Now, landing this jet is something you will want to practice a few times. It's one of the only taildragger jets ever built, which can be a little weird, and you want to keep the slow throttle response in mind as you're trying to go in for final. You can drop gear a bit over 400 kilometers an hour and landing flaps a bit over 300. The cockpit on this jet offers outstanding all-around visibility, but the interior is pretty low-res with drawn-on instruments left over from the early years of Warthunder. It's a good cockpit as long as you keep your eyes outside. To close out on the Yak-15. This jet has excellent dogfighting agility. Yup. However, it's chronically underpowered. Its guns are difficult to use effectively, and it doesn't get much ammo for the guns. The final verdict on the Yak-15 is that you've really got to try to like this thing. Its shortcomings end up being major weaknesses that can scare players away from this jet pretty quickly, but I'll admit it's oddly satisfying when you have a good match with it. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.